The night air along High Ridge felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite name, as though the trees had leaned in a fraction closer while I wasn't looking. My boots pressed into damp pine needles, each step echoing too long, like the forest was replaying the sound back at me for its own amusement. I stopped, tried to breathe steady, but the breath came out thin and trembling, fogging the beam of my headlamp like smoke drifting from a fire I couldn't see. The silence pressed so heavily against my ears that I almost whispered just to hear a human voice. That's when I noticed the tape. Bright surveyor's orange, but the strip fluttered inward, pointing into the restricted zone like a finger beckoning. The official story was landslide hazard, but I've walked landslides before. Dirt doesn't whisper. Rockfalls don't leave neat borders on a ranger's GPS. I tied my own red ribbon to the tree beside it, a breadcrumb to keep myself honest. But the knot seemed to slacken the moment I pulled away. I swear the tape sagged lower, as if it were tired of holding me back. The forest had grown still in a way that wasn't natural. No owls, no insects. Even the creek I'd been following seemed to have swallowed its own voice. I bent low, tossing a pebble into the current. It didn't splash. It clicked against stone and rolled hollow like a marble in a pipe. My radio buzzed then, but the signal staggered, voice chopped apart by dead air. Unit 7, repeat. Then silence. I pressed the call button, answered with my call sign, and waited. Nothing came back, just a faint rustle, like someone brushing past fabric directly against the speaker. I tried again, slower this time. Repeating protocol, spelling letters out phonetically, stretching the syllables like that would make them reach farther. No reply. The forest listened, though. I could feel it, like 100 unseen ears straining behind bark and soil. I kept walking. Each step into the restricted zone felt heavier, like my boots had been swapped for someone else's, the soles sticking too long against the earth. The tape strips multiplied as I went deeper, crisscrossing like veins, guiding me into something that didn't want to be mapped. There's a superstition among rangers, one we only mutter during night shifts. We say, if the forest goes quiet, you're already in its mouth. I remembered that phrase now. Too late, standing there with my lamp beam cutting through trees that suddenly looked identical, like the forest had copy-pasted itself in every direction. I thought about turning back, but the ribbon I had tied was gone. I scanned the trees, the bark, the branches, nothing. My red marker had vanished. In its place, faint scuffs in the dirt that matched my tread exactly. Prints that looked older, pressed deeper, but matched my boots like a mirror. Panic rose in my chest, that cold climb of dread that makes your body lighter instead of heavier. I forced myself to kneel, to examine the prints, but the moment my fingers brushed the soil, I heard it again. 3 soft knocks from beneath me, hollow, waiting, patient. I froze, counting seconds like beads on a rosary. 1, 2, 3, 4. Too long. The echo stretched unnaturally, coming back late, out of sync, as though someone below was still deciding how to answer. My skin crawled with the thought that the ground was listening for my name. I remembered the old stories we used to trade during wildfire season, half jokes to kill the night hours. Miners who claimed tunnels shifted when they weren't looking. Hunters who swore they tracked elk only to find their own boot prints leading them in circles. Nobody laughed at those stories now. I straightened, tried to anchor myself in ritual. Checked my watch, 2:17. Tapped the compass twice. Counted my breaths in sets of 5. Rituals are rules, and rules keep the world in place. At least they're supposed to. The compass needle spun lazy circles like it was drunk. The forest waited. I swear it held its breath to match mine. Then came a sound behind me, low and wet, like a cough dragged through mud. I spun, lamp beam jittering, but there was nothing there. Nothing but trunks leaning closer, shadows thick as fabric. Not real. Real. Not real. Not like this. The phrase looped in my head, heartbeat syncing with the words. I clutched the map in my vest pocket, felt the crease where the restricted zone was marked, and realized the paper had grown warm, like skin held too long. That's when I knocked. 3 times against the nearest cedar, just to prove I was still the one making choices. My hand stung from the impact. The sound rang, stretched, bent back on itself. Then came the answer. 3 knocks, deeper, from the ground, directly below my boots. The forest didn't move. It didn't have to. The reply was enough. My heart stuttered, my throat locked, and the silence swelled back in, thicker than before, swallowing my radio, my breath, even the memory of sound. That's when I understood. I hadn't stepped into a closure zone. I'd stepped into a corridor. The corridor, that's the only word my head would allow, didn't open like a door, didn't glow, didn't rotate the trees into some cinematic spiral. It just arranged the world so that forward was the most polite direction. I told myself to mark my path, tie ribbons every 10 paces, talk through the protocol like a bedtime prayer. 10 paces, red tape. 10 paces, red tape. I clicked my headlamp lower to save battery and felt the dark rise like water up to my teeth. I tied the first ribbon high on a fir limb, knot tight, tug-tested, the little tail flicking like a fox's ear in the breeze that wasn't actually blowing. I stared at it longer than necessary, daring it to behave like normal fabric. It did, until I took 3 steps. Then it sighed into stillness, and I could swear the color dulled as if it had been rained on for a week. Not possible, I told myself. Not real. Real. Not real. I counted softly as I moved. 1 to 5 with each breath, thumb brushing the compass bezel, boot soles placing themselves for the return trip I had already promised I'd take. 10 paces, red tape. 10 paces, red tape. When I turned to place the second marker, the first was gone. Not fallen. Gone. The branch was bare but wore a pale rub mark, like something had slid the knot off without untying it, without touching it at all. The radio answered perfectly, a cushion of static with little teeth in it, a gentle hiss that people mistake for company. Then it cut out mid-word and left the shape of my sentence hanging in the cold. I lowered the handset and listened as the forest slid the next minute around me like a glove. Not real. Real. Not real. The nacho cheese orange of survey tape winked once more and hid itself behind bark I had already memorized. 10 paces, red tape. 10 paces, red tape. On the 11th pace, I heard my own step repeat behind me. Same weight, same grit. Late by a heartbeat. I turned, expecting a deer, a poacher, anything with an explanation, and found only trunks and a dim, polite path I hadn't noticed before. Not a trail, an arrangement. The needles lay combed in a way wind doesn't know. I told the corridor it could keep its manners and kept to my count. At 30 paces I placed another ribbon and, because stubbornness is a kind of bravery, I clipped a spare carabiner onto the knot to make the branch sing if it moved. I walked on. The forest leaned in the way a crowd leans when the magician gestures. I looked back. The carabiner was still, but the ribbon wore a new crease as if it had just been folded in half by patient, invisible fingers. You are alone, I told myself. Act like it.
It should have comforted me that the ground stayed firm, that the slope gentled, that the GPS light still blinked. Instead, each normal thing felt borrowed, as if on loan from a more honest forest. I stopped to tie another ribbon and found a ribbon already there. My brand of tape, my handwriting sharpied on the tail. Unit 7. Only the ink had weathered like a winter's worth of storms. The knot was mine, and I had not tied it. Rituals keep the shape of a person when the night wants to pour you out. So, I invented new ones. 3 taps on my chest where the radio strap crossed. 2 squeezes of the flashlight handle. A breath held for 5. I told the corridor I would not be rude in its house. I told the corridor I would not knock without purpose. Then I knocked on a trunk anyway, soft. 3 beats. For the hollow I hoped wasn't there. There are field checks we do to make time behave. Name 5 blue things. Touch metal. Recount what you just did in reverse. Blue. The ink in my pen. The band on my watch. The gleam on the GPS bezel. The ghost of daylight in the west. The veins on my knuckles. Metal. Carabiner. Compass. Zipper pull. Reverse. Knocked. Counted. Tied. The world steadied enough to let me hear water again. Only, it wasn't water. It was the sound of water thinking. The ribbon behind me made a soft, papery noise. I turned in time to watch it shorten itself by a finger's width, the tail retreating into the knot, as if the branch were a mouth winding in a noodle. A childish anger flared. I stepped back, grabbed it and tied another knot right on top of the first. Ugly. Doubled. The branch creaked a complaint. I apologized to the tree. The apology felt stolen, from a different moment I hadn't lived yet. I took one more step and the pantry door opened. Not an actual door, an effect, a shift, like a room changing its mind about where the exit should be. Ahead, a column of air felt colder by at least 10 degrees. My breath fogged. The pine needles underfoot flexed as if over slats. I pressed the radio's transmit and recited my coordinates calmly like a person leaving a message before boarding a plane. The click at the end was the loneliest sound. I turned to plan the retreat I already knew I wouldn't take. The path outward looked sensible again, a corridor dressed in ordinary shrubs. I took 10 paces toward it and felt the ground ask me a question by flexing once, gently, like a handshake. It wanted my answer in knocks. It wanted my answer in names. I told it no, maybe, not yet, all at once, by doing the most human thing I could think of. I pretended not to understand. The corridor gave me its first gift in the dirt, a set of boot prints so perfect they could have been molded from my own soles. Same tread, same spacing, same lazy drag mark from a left heel that had worn uneven after a season of rock scrambles. They looked recent, yet the edges had slumped with age, softened by weather. I crouched, lamp tilted low, and set my boot into one. Perfect fit. The earth recognized me before I recognized it. I muttered protocol under my breath. If you find tracks, note their depth, note their direction, note their freshness. But each answer bent sideways. Depth, mine. Direction, mine. Freshness, older than I could allow. The prince ran ahead, threading through ferns that folded away like curtains. I thought of mirrors laid flat, catching not your face but your steps. The kind of reflection you can fall into. The kind of reflection that waits. I pressed my palm to the soil beside one track, testing for warmth. Cold, too cold, as though the ground had been storing the absence of a body rather than its weight. My chest tightened. Breath slipped out ragged,
tremor in every exhale. I whispered my own call sign into the night like a leash tugging me back, hoping the syllables would anchor. The forest muttered it back, reversed. Consonants chewed and spat behind my ear. The prints multiplied the farther I walked, branching into versions of me. One set pacing in circles, one set veering off only to return, one set kneeling by a cedar trunk as if waiting for orders. Each path promised an ending I hadn't yet chosen. I forced myself onto the straightest line, though the forest bent it like a trick ruler. With each step I counted, but my numbers looped. 5, 6, 7, 5, 6. My tongue stumbled, trying to fix them. I remembered the old ranger folklore then, the story of a colleague who swore he tracked his own ghost across High Ridge for 3 nights. They said he came back wrong, wrote backwards in his log, saluted with the left hand, smiled too wide. The office called it heat stroke. The veterans called it footstep borrowing. I called it nonsense at the time. Now I watched my boots vanish into prints already waiting for me and wondered if I had been the ghost all along. I bent low to examine a print more carefully. Pressed soil crumbled not into dirt but into powdery flakes, as if the ground had grown brittle from replaying the same step too many times. The edges shimmered faintly when my headlamp passed, like light caught in mica. I reached a finger toward it, stopped, withdrew. Something deep told me, don't complete the gesture. Don't let the loop close. The sound arrived then, 3 dull taps from beneath the prints themselves. Panic came on soft at first, then gnawed hard. My throat swelled like it didn't trust air. I forced ritual into my limbs, 3 taps on the chest strap, 2 squeezes of flashlight, 1 breath held. Ritual meant rules. Rules meant shape. Still, my pulse stuttered. The forest pressed tighter, each trunk a vertebra in a spine I was trespassing. The boot prints waited, patient, as if asking whether I'd walk into the future or sink into the past. I lifted one boot and placed it deliberately beside the next print rather than inside it. A choice, however small. The earth groaned under my weight, low and unhappy, like a floorboard under centuries of strain. For a moment I thought the entire ground might hinge open, reveal the room of me waiting underneath. But it held, reluctant. I moved forward again, repeating the defiance. Step the side, never in. Step the side. The rhythm was my rebellion. The radio popped once, voice fragment bleeding through. Don't answer. Then silence. My mouth dried. I wanted to call back, ask who had warned me, but the prints already knew. They curved toward a cedar whose hollow breathed a faint draft, cool and damp, carrying the scent of iron. The kneeling set of prints led straight into it. I shone the beam, half expecting my own face staring back. Only blackness. Blackness with depth. Blackness that exhaled. I knelt beside the hollow, aware I was mirroring the ghost in the dirt. My knees sank exactly where theirs had pressed. Soil conformed too eagerly, as though recognizing the weight of an old friend. My gloved hand brushed the rim. Sap clung wet and sticky, though no wound marred the bark. When I withdrew, the sap gleamed darker than it should, almost red. I licked dry lips, whispered again, "Not real. Real. Not real. Not like this."
Something inside the hollow tapped back. Not wood against wood, but the faint rhythm of fingers against glass. I stumbled backward, knocking my shoulder into a trunk. The sound repeated, patient, asking not for entry but for acknowledgement. I refused. I walked backward 10 paces, eyes on the cedar, until the prints blurred into one another and the forest shifted its shape again. Behind me, my newest ribbon sagged low, folding into the branch like it had been there for years. The corridor didn't scold me for refusing, didn't close. It just rearranged itself politely, the way a host might after a guest ignores the hors d'oeuvres. The prints vanished into ordinary earth, the hollow sealed behind bark grain. The ribbons hid themselves like embarrassed servants. Only the sense remained, that I had been offered a place in a loop, and I had declined. Declined for now. The air sighed, relieved or disappointed, I couldn't tell. The corridor led onward. I told myself the prints were gone, that refusal meant release, but the corridor didn't feel finished with me. It felt like it had simply changed tools. I reached for certainty, the way a drowning person reaches for a branch. Certainty, for me, lived on creased paper and penciled notes. My map. I slipped it from the vest pocket, felt its familiar weight, and something unfamiliar, warmth, as if it had been sitting on a radiator instead of against my chest. I unfolded it once, twice, 3 times, careful not to tear the tired fiber at the corners, that soft place where maps begin to confess. The restricted zone sat in its neat polygon, a light gray that used to feel bureaucratic and now felt personal. Then I noticed a 4th crease that should not exist, a diagonal raised like scar tissue, running from a fire road that hasn't been cut yet to a ridge spur that the map pretends isn't there. Cartographers don't put creases where we need them. We put creases where our hands insist. I hadn't folded this line, yet it ran true as if pressed by a machine. When I tried flattening it, the paper resisted with the stubbornness of healed skin. The headlamp glare found a faint gloss along that ridge, and for a heartbeat the printing ink wavered, as if the map were remembering an older version of itself. I whispered, "Don't," and the gloss went dull. Superstitions from the backcountry office crowded close. Never trace a boundary with your finger unless you intend to cross it. Never speak a trail's old name after dark. Always fold your map as you found it, or the land will refold you. I laughed once, sharp and unhelpful, and the map responded with a papery sigh that didn't belong to wind or hands. I turned the sheet to catch more light, avoiding the urge to trace that new crease. The compass tried to help and failed with dignity. Its needle drifted like a drunk dragonfly, then settled on a heading that marched straight along the impossible crease. I tapped the bezel twice, the way my first training officer taught me, and the needle obediently jittered, only to slide back to the same wrong true. The corridor had opinions about north. It wanted me to understand that direction was a courtesy, and tonight it would be granting a different one. I worked a ranger's ritual. Say the steps aloud. Make small things specific. Half-fold lengthwise, smooth, edge to edge. Quarter-fold, align the legend. Thumb press the corners. Breathe out on the exhale. When I tried to tuck the paper back into its old geometry, it bucked. The new diagonal insisted, reteaching my hands how the world should collapse. I gave in, just enough, folding along the scar, and felt the forest around me tilt 3 degrees cooler. The GPS flickered like it wanted to be honest and couldn't. The screen rendered a position marker right on the crease, then dimmed, then returned with my trail backfilled by a thread I hadn't walked. My stomach rolled. I rocked on my heels the way you test ice and heard the tiniest resonant tone under the soil, a long glassy hum that didn't belong to dirt. The crease on paper lined up with the sound in ground like notation. I told myself a story to keep fear in its crate. Once upon a time, the county planned a corridor but never cut it. The plan leaked into the forest in drafts and memos and lunchroom talk. And the land, generous and literal, made space for it anyway. So the corridor exists here, where intention pooled, where names were spoken over maps too many times. My voice tried that version on and nearly fit. The nearly was the problem. Against training, against sense, I let my finger follow the new fold, not quite touching, just guiding air from symbol to symbol. Fire road, switchback, spur, ravine. The paper warmed further wherever my finger passed, as if distance itself were a friction I could feel. The tip of my glove brushed a printed contour line by accident, and a low breath answered from below. The kind you hear when someone wakes in the next room and decides not to call. Okay, I told the corridor. If I play along, you keep the rules broadcast. Saying it helped. Saying it made a scaffolding where there had been a drop. I folded the map the way it wanted, corner to corner, diagonal to diagonal, until the paper collapsed into a long, narrow strip like a boarding pass. The legend hid inside. The crease sat proud. When I lifted it to my ear like a child, it hissed softly, a static shoreline. I realized then what was missing. My own handwritten grid notes. I annotate every assignment, tiny pencil figures at junctions, dates along fire roads, a small star for reliable water. Half of them had faded as if the paper had exhaled them. The others were there but wrong. Letters slouching backward, numbers wearing their mirror faces. The map kept the fact of my marks but not their meaning, like a mouth moving without the sound. My name on the margin smudged left. I dug out a pencil to fix it. The lead met paper and skated like it had found gloss instead of fiber. A bead of graphite rolled along the crease and pooled in the valley, gathering into a neat dot that looked absurdly like an eye. I blinked. The dot remained. When I tried to smear it flat, the graphite resisted and then snapped to a thinner point, a perfectly round pupil with a hair of shine, unblinking. Not real, I said, and wrote the word real in block letters to spite myself. The letters came out steady enough, but they tilted ever so slightly toward the crease, like iron filings to a magnet. I underlined them, slow, deliberate. The underline bent on its own and joined the fold halfway through as if relieved. I laughed again, softer this time because the sound kept me tethered. The corridor approved silence, more than laughter. The trees leaned back, listening. I tried my radio once more. Unit 7 to dispatch, marking anomaly on map. Corridor. I caught myself. Closure crease detected, returning by previous markers. My thumb eased off transmit, and the handset returned to sound like a chair pushed across tile 3 rooms away. Then a voice bled in, the exact texture of my own, low and measured. Fold it the other way. I didn't squeeze the button. I didn't need to. The voice wasn't on the air. There are a dozen ways to fold a topo. Some are tidy, some are fast. None are forgiving. I turned the strip in my hands and reversed each move, building a shape that would make a cartographer wince. Edges misaligned, legend on the outside, a lozenge that didn't fit any pocket. The moment it flattened, the forest around me arranged like furniture rolled back for dance. A corridor appeared, not by sight but by pressure, air thinning ahead, deepening behind. I stepped forward on reflex and the map tugged me like a kite catching a thermal. The crease aligned with the cold seam in the air, a zipper on an invisible coat that wanted opening. For a second I imagined walking straight into the paper, into the crease, and coming out printed with new edges. I folded the map once more just to have the sound of paper in my hands. Sound makes a kind of floor when the ground is thinking. Time did its parlor trick then. Some minutes swelled, others folded inside them. The headlamp beam felt longer, the batteries less mortal. I made myself inventory the night. Canopy high, fur resin sharp, lone damp, breath steady. Heartbeat not steady, temperature dropping. It gave me a spine to speak facts into. Fact, the corridor wanted the map. Fact, I was not ready to surrender it. Fact, the map had already learned how to live here without me. Fact was thin. I tucked the map back into my vest. Not the original pocket, but a new one the fold had invented between layers, as if the garment had anticipated a different future. It slid home with too much ease, too much relief. I imagined the crease pressing through fabric, laying marks on my ribs like a ruler. The compass hung against my chest, dutiful and wrong. I could feel it spin without looking, as if my sternum had learned to be north. Ahead, the trees respected the idea of a path without committing to the fact of one. I followed the pressure, the gradient in the air, the elegance of the fold. The forest's quiet shifted from empty to productive, like a workshop after hours where the tools keep whispering what they were built for. I repeated my ritual inventory every 10 steps and added a rule. Do not trace the crease with your eyes. Do not name what wants naming. When the first true sign arrived, it was almost courteous. A sliver of wood on the ground, planed smooth, as if from a door, with a small brass brad near one end. The sort of scrap carpenter's pocket without thinking. I towed it. It clicked against a buried twin, then another, and then the quiet underneath resolved into the delicate, layered hush of stairs. I exhaled through my nose, held the map like a warrant, and took the first step. The stairs led me down only a few steps before the ground remembered itself as soil again. I came out beside the creek I had passed earlier, only now it was stripped of sound. Water moved, clear under my lamp, but without the voice of current. Pebbles tumbled in the flow, rolled against one another, but produced no click, no churn, no splash. It was like watching film with the volume muted. I stood, ears straining, and heard only my own blood. I crouched to test it. A rock the size of my fist sat at the bank. I hefted it, felt its gritty weight, and dropped it straight into the channel. It struck, sank, disturbed the current, but the expected report never came. My body braced for a splash that never arrived. The soundless impact punched a hollow into my gut. I tried again, smaller stone, then smaller, until pebbles vanished with no voice, like mouths opening underwater but never speaking. The radio hissed once, sharp, like it wanted to fill in the missing note. Instead, silence swallowed it whole. I pressed transmit, whispered my location, and listened to nothing reply. The creek shimmered as though aware of the attempt, the way a listener perks when hearing their own name across a room. Folklore prickled through memory, old stories of rivers that carried voices rather than boats, creeks that traded secrets for footsteps. Some claimed you could drown just by listening too long. I leaned closer, hands on knees, and saw it then. The current didn't flow forward as it should. It looped upon itself, spiraling tiny whorls that fed back into their own wake. The whole creek had become an eddy, time and water folding like my map. My breath fogged low to the surface, and for a moment I thought I saw words spelled in condensation. 3 crooked syllables scrawled backward. I blinked and the message melted back into ripples. Compulsions are a ranger's worst enemy. You tell yourself you'll just test once more, just one more measurement, and suddenly you've trespassed. I couldn't stop myself. I dipped gloved fingers into the flow. Cold should have shocked me, but instead the water wrapped warm, almost maternal, pulling gently at each knuckle as though encouraging me to write. My lamp beam caught a trail behind my hand, bright as silver ink, curling letters in a script I didn't know yet recognized. The creek was writing with me. Every swirl of my wrist completed a curve, every lift of my finger punctuated a line. I jerked back, stumbled onto the bank, and wiped my hand against moss until the warmth died. On the water, the letters held for a few seconds longer, then collapsed inward, devoured by the looping current. My pulse thundered, ears roaring against silence that shouldn't roar. Not real. Real. Not real. Not like this. I thought of my first month in service, when an old ranger warned, "If the water stops talking, you're the one it wants to hear." Back then I laughed, called it backcountry hazing. Tonight, the memory came with a weight that bent my shoulders. The creek wanted me, wanted my voice. I licked dry lips, tasted iron, and almost spoke. My jaw worked, but I snapped it shut, molars clicking like a lock. I would not feed it. The current objected. It lifted a wavelet against the shore, reached a handless palm toward my boot, and receded again. I took a step back, counting paces aloud, making noise where the world refused to. 1, 2, 3. My numbers sounded flat, muffled like I was speaking through cloth. The creek hushed in time with my cadence, weaving my voice into its voiceless loop. For the first time that night, I knew what it felt like to be borrowed. I pulled the map from my vest, half thinking the crease would align here too. The paper seemed to hum in sympathy, edges trembling. I unfolded it partway and found a thin blue line for the creek, but it ended abruptly halfway across the page, unfinished. Past that point, nothing but a white scar of paper where rivers should thread. I angled the lamp. The unfinished line quivered, then extended itself a hair, blue pigment crawling forward like a living vein. My gut revolted. I slammed the map shut, folded wrong on purpose, forcing the crease to misalign. The creek shivered, displeased, and the water began to froth silently as if boiling without heat. My ritual saved me. Tap chest strap 3 times, squeeze flashlight twice, hold breath for 5. The froth settled, the loop softened. The creek returned to glassy calm. But I knew I had given myself away. The forest had learned my rhythm. My ritual was no longer mine. Behind me, branches shifted as though someone large walked parallel in the dark. I spun, lamp catching only trees, but the sound persisted, circling, pacing my breath. The creek glowed faintly now, its loop brighter, each swirl painting silver lines onto the trunks that leaned close. They carried script, too, lines wrapping bark, curling into knots. I couldn't read them, but I felt the shapes press against the language part of my brain, too loud to ignore. I forced retreat. 1 step back, then another, eyes locked on the current. Pebbles gleamed like teeth in the lamplight, gnashing without noise. A logjam downstream rose against gravity, lifted like the back of something surfacing. For an instant I swore I saw antlers breaking water, bone white, gliding backward against flow. I blinked hard, lamp jittering, and the shape dissolved into logs again. Not real. Real. Not real. Not like this. By the time I cleared 20 paces, the creek faded behind me, volume still muted, but presence pulsing at the edges of hearing. My ribbons were gone again, of course. The corridor always adjusted, always folded the past into something I hadn't lived. The soil underfoot hummed faintly like the last note of a tuning fork. Ahead waited deeper quiet, deeper rules, deeper debt. I let one truth anchor me. The creek had kept something of me. The corridor wanted more. The creek's silence faded behind me, but in its place rose another rhythm, a hollow resonance, faint at first, then steady, like a drum played 3 rooms away. My headlamp caught a cedar ahead, trunk wide enough that 3 grown men couldn't have wrapped their arms around it. The sound came from within. Each beat carried not just percussion, but cadence, syllables tucked inside wood grain. I felt it in my chest more than my ears. The tree was speaking. I approached with the reverence you give an altar or a grave. The bark was scarred with old lightning, long closed wounds crusted black but still glistening with resin. When I pressed my palm to it, warmth seeped back, pulsing faintly like blood through thick skin. Then the voices started, faint whispers echoing conversations I knew too well. Dispatch codes from my first fire season, roll calls from training, even laughter from a supervisor long retired. The cedar carried my history in its hollow. I bent low, listening closer, and the whispers sharpened. They weren't random fragments, but recordings, perfect replicas of words I had spoken into radios, into journals, into the night air when I thought no one heard. My own voice, repeated, lagging behind my memory by half a beat. Unit 7, all clear. Unit 7, perimeter stable. Unit 7, cut off mid-call, just as it had been earlier. The forest wasn't only watching, it had been taping. Fear grew teeth then, sharp behind my ribs. What had I fed this place without knowing? Each word I had ever spoken seemed to cling here, stored in resin and ring count. My instinct was to claw the bark, to rip my voice back out, but training held me. I cataloged instead. Smell of pitch, texture of grooves, temperature steady warm. Ritual kept me steady. Ritual kept me from becoming another recording for the cedar to repeat on loop. Then the whispers changed. They stopped mimicking and began anticipating, spitting words I had not yet said. Turn left. Don't breathe. Fold the map. Each phrase dropped half a second before my thoughts reached them. The cedar wasn't just echoing. It was reading the draft of my choices, correcting them like a teacher with red pen. I staggered back, boot scuff loud against root. The tree replayed the sound instantly, scuff for scuff, making my own clumsiness foreign. I pressed transmit on the radio out of reflex, voice cracking. Dispatch, possible mimic, unknown interference. Static answered, then a recording of me from years back. Dispatch, Unit 7 reporting normal. Same cadence, same fatigue, same little chuckle I used to fake confidence. The cedar layered both together until I couldn't tell which belonged to me. My hands shook so hard the lamp beam jittered like a strobe, making shadows sprint across the clearing. There's a saying in fire camps, the hollow trees don't just burn hotter, they burn honest. I thought about that, Imagined flames licking through this cedar, forcing it to release decades of stolen voices in one deafening roar. I wondered what a bonfire of myself would sound like. The thought terrified me, but it also tempted. Better to scorch the evidence than to let the corridor keep me cataloged like inventory. My lighter sat heavy in my pocket. I resisted. Fire would answer too many questions at once, and the corridor thrived on questions. Instead, I set a rule. I would give the cedar one word only, deliberately chosen, something meaningless, and see if it echoed. I leaned close, lips brushing bark, and whispered, "Marrow." My breath fogged resin. The cedar paused, then repeated, "Marrow," in my own voice, deepened, aged. The forest absorbed the syllable like a tithe. My experiment proved what I feared. It could keep anything. The resin gleamed brighter where I had spoken, as though it marked the spot of deposit. I scratched at it with a knife tip, but the resin swallowed the blade a millimeter deep, refusing to give. The word had sunk too far. In panic, I tapped chest strap thrice, squeezed flashlight twice, held breath for 5. Ritual steadied me, but the cedar answered anyway, whispering the ritual back in distorted rhythm, mocking my own salvation. I backed away until my calves pressed moss. The cedar's whispers faded, not weaker but more selective, like a radio tuned away from one frequency toward another. That's when I heard my name, clear and crisp, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize. It came not from the cedar's hollow, but from the air behind me. I spun, lamps sweeping trunks. Empty. The voice repeated my name, slower, syllables thick like they'd been chewed. The cedar chuckled in response. Something in me wanted desperately to answer, to complete the call-in response. Rules burned in my mind. Never answer if it knows your name. I clamped my jaw shut until my teeth ached. The cedar's whispers pressed harder, overlapping, offering my name in 100 intonations, mocking, pleading, instructing. My throat pulsed with the effort of restraint. A hollow thump from inside the tree punctuated the chorus, like a gavel demanding verdict. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping. I steadied, clutching the map like scripture. Paper rustled sharp in the night, its crease vibrating faintly with each whisper. The map wanted to join the conversation, wanted to fold to match the cedar's pulse. I forced it flat against my chest and spoke aloud, not to the tree, but to myself. Not real, real, not real, not like this. The rhythm quieted the echo just enough that I could breathe without hearing it borrowed back. For now. When I finally turned away, I didn't run. Running leaves prints too easy for borrowing. I walked steady, ritual in limbs. 3 taps, 2 squeezes, 1 breath. Behind me, the cedar hummed with the voices it had collected. A choir made of stolen psalms, looping on a song that wasn't music, but memory. The last line I heard as distance grew was my own, spoken not in fear but in calm command. Leave what you brought. It chilled me more than screams. The cedar's choir faded into distance, but the rule it whispered, leave what you brought, wouldn't leave me. It rolled inside my skull like a marble in a bowl, louder than the silence around me. The corridor never gave without taking, never opened without toll. I could feel its attention now, pressing against my back, waiting to see what I'd surrender. The weight of my pack, my gear, even my breath felt suddenly negotiable. I inventoried in a whisper, ritual voice steady. Map. Compass. Radio. Knife. Ribbons. Lighter. Each syllable tasted like confession. The forest shifted closer at certain words, hungry when I named the map, indifferent when I named the knife. That told me enough. It wanted knowledge, not defense. It wanted my sense of place, not my means of survival. The realization cut sharp. This wasn't a trade. It was a tithe, and I was late in offering. The ground beneath my boots trembled once, subtle as a heartbeat. Pebbles jittered on moss. The air chilled, not evenly but in streaks, as though invisible hands moved through it, brushing past my cheek. I pulled the map from my vest, its new crease glowing faint under the lamp. My fingers clung too tight. The idea of giving it up felt like tearing a vein from my wrist. Yet the corridor waited with patience older than my refusal. I thought of every ranger who'd walked before me, their warnings smuggled into folklore because paperwork couldn't carry them. Never whistle after dark. Never leave tape where you can't find it twice. Never answer your own name. All of those rules carried the same spine. Give something up before something takes it. My breath stuttered, the choice narrowing like a throat closing. The map vibrated faintly, begging or warning, I couldn't tell. I knelt, spreading the map across my thigh. The crease pulsed, faint light. My pencil rolled off the page on its own, tapping root, as though nudged by unseen knuckle. "You want this," I whispered. "You want the shape of me." The forest leaned closer, every shadow drawing inward. I folded the map once more, not to pocket it, but to offer. My hand shook as I placed it on the moss, palm pressed flat above it. The ground sighed in relief, like fabric loosening after a tight stitch. The chill withdrew, air smoothing warmer around me. The map sank a fraction into the soil, fibers darkening as though drinking moisture. I yanked my hand back, heart slamming. The paper remained half buried, visible, yet claimed. The crease no longer glowed. It rested, sated. The corridor had accepted my tithe. My chest felt lighter, not with peace, but with theft. Something essential had been taken. I staggered upright, dizzy from the surrender. The compass swung heavy at my chest, spinning lazily, suddenly free of the map's burden. I tapped it twice, needle steadied for the first time since stepping in. North was north again. But the price pressed sharp. Without the map, the forest's paths felt limitless and meaningless at once, a labyrinth without lines. The corridor hadn't stolen my tool. It had stolen my certainty. The radio crackled alive. Unit 7 copy. For half a heartbeat, hope surged. I pressed transmit, answered, "Unit 7, loud and clear." Silence. Then the same phrase returned in my own voice, slightly delayed, slightly weary, as if borrowed from me seconds earlier. It was proof. The corridor had kept my words like the cedar, kept my path like the creek. It was building a version of me that didn't need me. I fought the urge to snatch the map back, to claw it from the moss. My hand twitched toward it before I remembered the rule. Never take back what the forest accepts. To reclaim would mean debt, deeper than I could pay. My jaw ached from clenching. I whispered another ritual. 3 taps, 2 squeezes, 1 breath. My hands obeyed, but the motions felt hollow, like a dance after the music has ended. The corridor hummed, satisfied. the forest rewarded my obedience with a path. Not a trail exactly, but a draft in the air, cooler and straighter, leading ahead. My lamp beam caught ribbon ends dangling from branches, my ribbons, but aged, weathered, blackened by time as though decades had passed since I tied them. I brushed one. It disintegrated under my glove, leaving only dust. My past had been accelerated to compost, proof that the corridor didn't just steal objects. It stole chronology. I walked forward, each pace both lighter and emptier. Behind me, the moss swallowed the map fully, no corner visible. My chest throbbed where the vest pressed, as though phantom weight lingered. Not real, not real, not like this. The mantra returned, slower now. Each word echoed faintly in the trees. The reply was polite, 3 knocks, approving my offering. My skin prickled with the realization that I had been initiated, not spared. The corridor had my map, my voice, my minutes. What would it ask next? What else would I bleed to keep walking? The creek had wanted my breath. The cedar had wanted my word. The path ahead whispered with new appetite. I knew, deep in marrow, that the tolls were not random. They were shaping me into something this place could use. I whispered aloud, steady and bitter. You won't get my name. The forest didn't laugh. It simply waited. The path narrowed until even the air felt compressed, pressing against my shoulders as though the forest were closing a zipper around me. Each breath came shallow, my ribs reluctant to expand. Then the ground shifted. Moss flattened beneath my boots, hardening into a surface too uniform, too deliberate. Boards without lumber, stone without quarry. The corridor was taking shape, not by adding walls but by removing choices. Forward was no longer direction. It was law. The first step downward revealed a sound I hadn't heard since childhood, the creak of a staircase in a house I didn't own. The air grew basement cold, moist enough that my lamp caught droplets hanging mid-fall before they struck earth. Only there was no splash. My ears popped as though I'd descended a dozen feet. My compass needle froze north with pride, then trembled, like it regretted the certainty. The radio at my hip hummed low, tuned to nothing. Each tread groaned under me, yet when I glanced back the stairs weren't wood or stone but simple slope, ordinary forest floor. The contradiction burned behind my eyes. I forced myself to touch a trunk beside me. The bark rippled like curtain fabric, smooth, then rough, then smooth again, as though it hadn't decided what tree it wanted to be. My glove came away damp. Sap? Number. Water. Cold as melted teeth. I wiped it off on my pants, shaking. At 30 steps down, the first sound that wasn't mine arrived. A whisper, too quiet to parse, but layered, 2, 3, maybe 4 voices stacked in dissonance. They weren't behind, weren't ahead. They were within, resonating in bone marrow, skipping the ears. I recognized one of them instantly. My own. My throat worked as the whisper repeated a fragment of my earlier log entry. Unit 7, anomaly on map. The others echoed phrases out of time, overlapping, like dispatches from different years. I stopped. The corridor punished me with silence so deep my heartbeat filled it. Then came footsteps, circling, mine, not mine, boots grinding soil in a spiral around me. My headlamp flared off trunks, caught glimpses of movement that refused to commit to form. A second beam of light flashed briefly far ahead, like another ranger's lamp, I called out before I could stop myself. The echo returned, voice perfectly matched to my own cadence, half a second late. The staircase groaned again, louder, bending my knees with a weight that wasn't gravity. My hands clutched the rail that wasn't there, fingers closing on empty air but feeling the certainty of wood under them. For a heartbeat, the world convinced me I was inside a ranger station. Fluorescent buzz, chair scrape, typewriter clack. Then the hallucination folded back into trees. The corridor had shown me a memory of a place not yet built, testing if I'd believe. I descended farther, driven more by pull than choice. Breath clouded the air in dense plumes. Each exhale lingered longer than natural, curling around my head like smoke reluctant to vanish. The whispers grew bolder, phrases lengthening. You left the map. You left yourself. You left minutes. My knees buckled with the weight of each accusation. They weren't wrong. The corridor was building its case, brick by brick, voice by voice, until refusal sounded less like defiance and more like denial. At the base, the corridor opened, not into clearing, not into cave, but into a long room that wasn't possible. Walls timbered with logs too fresh to have aged, rafters wet with sap, floors marked with desk legs but no desks, the smell of pine mixed with toner and coffee. A ranger station, half-formed, stitched from blueprints I'd glimpsed in planning memos but never visited, future dressed in present. My lamp trembled across blank bulletin boards waiting for names. I knew then, the corridor wasn't improvising. It was rehearsing. Practicing futures the way a child rehearses lies in a mirror. My boots thudded across the unfinished floor, sound crisp, too crisp, like the acoustics of an office rather than a forest. At the far end sat a desk, battered, covered in forms. My hand lifted before thought, drawn to the papers. Each bore my signature in cramped, hurried scrawl. The ink shimmered as though still wet. Behind me, the door I hadn't seen closed slow. My skin prickled. I didn't remember entering, yet something had remembered closing. The radio clicked alive with chatter that never happened. Unit 7 confirmed, corridor secured. Another voice, older, mine again, weary. Leave the file in triplicate. A chorus of laughter, my laughter, filled the room. The papers fluttered as though someone had exhaled across them. My hand trembled above the nearest sheet. I hadn't written them, yet. The desk looked ordinary until I touched it. My fingertips came away sticky with resin, not ink. The wood pulsed faintly like skin, each grain line throbbing in rhythm with my heart. A form lay flat on top. Ranger Incident Report, filled in margin to margin. My name at the header, my badge number correct, my handwriting cramped in every box. But the date, 30 years ahead. I flipped to the next page, another report, then another. All mine. The first one described tonight's patrol in detail, my boots catching en route, my breath fogging the lamp, my radio cutting out mid-transmission. The second detailed a conversation I hadn't had yet, dialogue with dispatch, word for word, logged as if already archived. The third read like a confession. Unit 7 offered the map. Corridor accepted. Corridor satisfied. My throat tightened. These weren't reports. They were receipts. The forest had kept proof of each choice, each surrender. I rifled faster, hands unsteady. The forms grew stranger the deeper I dug. Reports written entirely in mirrored script. Others typed in block letters I didn't recognize but felt the shape of, like déjà vu.
One was burned at the edges, scorched not from flame but from absence, the paper thinning into pure light. My lamp flickered as though protesting. Each sheet rustled louder than my own breath, louder than my pulse. I wasn't reading. I was being read. That's when I saw him, seated in the chair I swore was empty moments earlier, head bent over the stack, pen scratching steadily. His hair gray where mine was dark, uniform sun-faded, hands shaking faintly with each stroke. My face only older, my body only used longer. He didn't look up at first, just kept writing, as if aware of me but unwilling to acknowledge the overlap. The sound of pen on paper filled the room like insects. When he finally lifted his eyes, they were mine, bloodshot, ringed with sleeplessness. But mine. "You're late," he said. His voice cracked like pine in fire. I tried to answer, but the words dissolved, throat locked. He slid a folder toward me, edges damp, pages swollen as though they had been rained on. The label on the tab read simply, "Borrowed Reports." His hand trembled, not from fear but from fatigue, as though the act of giving cost him hours. I opened the folder with reluctance. Inside, notes scrawled in margins, hurried, desperate. Don't answer if it knows your name. Knock only odd. Leave what you brought. Half-legible sentences curled into pleading. Stop me before I finish writing this. My stomach turned. These weren't instructions for survival. They were apologies. I skimmed further and found entire pages overwritten by a single phrase. "You will write this." Each line identical in pressure, in slope, in my handwriting. Why? My voice cracked finally. Why me? The older me, future me, smiled without humor. Because it needs authors. Without reports it forgets. Without memory it starves. We feed it paperwork, and it feeds us minutes. Borrowed time, borrowed steps. You know that already. His hand shook again, setting pen down. The silence pressed after, but not empty, expectant. The corridor wanted me to accept the handoff, to inherit the task. I thought about refusing, about tearing the reports, burning them, scattering ashes. But the folder's weight felt magnetic. My fingers clung despite myself. The older me pushed the stack closer, and the papers slid too easily, like ice across glass. His lips moved in whisper too soft to catch, yet my chest vibrated with the words. Take it. I'm tired. Take it. The shadows thickened behind him, pressing his frame thinner. His chair groaned like a coffin lid shifting. I forced another ritual. 3 taps, 2 squeezes, 1 breath. But when I tapped my chest strap, his hand mirrored. Same rhythm, same timing, same exhausted eyes. The corridor had taught him too. My breath hitched as I realized the truth. These rituals weren't mine. They belonged to the place. It had written them through me, through him, through anyone who walked here. I was just the newest draft. He chuckled once, bitter. See, even your safety isn't yours. The folder pulsed warmer in my grip. I didn't remember choosing to hold it, but my knuckles whitened around the cardboard edges. Inside, the reports shifted, words crawling like insects across margins, reforming sentences. My lamp caught new text writing itself line by line. Unit 7 accepted the borrowed reports.
My signature appeared beneath without my hand moving. I dropped the folder in shock, but the papers clung to my boots like static, refusing to scatter. Future me sighed in relief, body sagging in chair. The shadows behind him pulled tighter, swallowing him piece by piece, until only pen-scratched hands remained. They wrote even as they vanished, dragging ink across paper that dissolved into the dark. I screamed, voice raw, but the echo came back deeper, heavier, as though shouted by the station itself. Unit 7, acknowledged. The folder at my feet glowed faintly. The trade was complete. I had inherited the job. The folder lay heavy at my boots, glowing faintly with the pulse of something alive. The reports inside had already begun writing themselves, ink bleeding forward like veins across each page. My older self was gone, swallowed by the corridor's shadows, but his absence lingered in the pen still scratching faintly on its own across the last sheet. I knew then what the cedar had warned, what the creek had hinted, what the map had demanded. You could stay, but only as paperwork. The air thickened, pressing like water at depth. My chest ached to draw a breath. A countdown ticked in the marrow of my bones, a clock I hadn't set but felt winding down. The corridor's voice whispered, not through cedar or current, but directly in my lungs. You have minutes. Borrowed ones. Leave now, or stay forever. The words repeated with every pulse, growing louder, bleeding into my heartbeat until thought itself throbbed in borrowed rhythm. I staggered toward the door, if door it was, the same scene that had creaked shut behind me. My lamp caught its edges flexing like lungs, swelling and collapsing. The folder tried to follow, pages sliding across floorboards with static crackle, clinging to my boots. I shook my legs, desperate, but each sheet stuck tighter, paper suctioning to leather like wet leaves. My throat burned with the urge to call for help, to shout, to make sound, but the cedar's warning echoed, "Do not answer if it knows your name." The corridor tested me, calling softly at first. Ranger. Then louder. Unit 7. Then finally, unmistakably, my name, spoken in a dozen versions, childhood timbre, teenage crack, adult fatigue. All mine, none safe. I bit down so hard my molars ached. To answer was to sign. To remain silent was to gamble. My lungs seared with the effort. I forced ritual instead. 3 taps, 2 squeezes, 1 breath. The corridor mocked me, tapping the sound back through floorboards. I collapsed to my knees, boots skidding across pages that wrapped my ankles like vines. The reports rustled, each line filling with the same phrase. Unit 7 remained. I screamed without sound, throat locked, breath swallowed whole by the room. My body shook with refusal. I bent forward, forehead pressing cold wood, and spat my own name into the dirt seam beneath the door. Wet syllables slapped against grain. The corridor recoiled as though stung. The papers screamed. Not metaphor, actual shrieks of torn cellulose, a chorus of dry, papery agony as they shriveled black against my boots. The folder curled inward, edges smoking with static, text vanishing letter by letter until only my signature remained. It crawled toward the crease, disappearing into the seam like ink sucked back into pen. The corridor trembled, stairboards groaning, rafters bending. I slammed palms against the ground, pushed up, and staggered toward the heaving door. It opened reluctantly, yawning with the pitch of a wounded animal. The air beyond rushed fresher, forest cold, pine sharp. I stumbled through, clutching nothing but the compass, still swinging wildly on my chest. Behind me, the door slammed, though there was no frame to hold it, no hinges to guide it. Just one last knocking on glass from beneath the soil. Polite, almost approving. My breath finally returned in a ragged flood, chest searing from the borrowed minutes expiring. The forest received me without welcome. My ribbons were gone. The creek hissed faint, almost like laughter. The cedar whispered from too far off to hear words, but close enough to remind me I'd left part of myself behind. The compass steadied north again, dutiful. The map was gone, the folder gone. But in my vest pocket, empty a moment before, a new page crinkled. My hand trembled as I pulled it free. Blank, except for 3 typed words. To be continued. I froze, page shaking in my hands. The letters blurred, fading, reappearing in different order. You continue it. My pulse hammered. My body ached with exhaustion, yet the corridor had given me homework, not escape. I stuffed the page back into the pocket, trying to ignore its warmth, trying to forget the way the words pulsed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. But as I staggered into the thinning trees, I knew the truth. Leaving wasn't the end. It was the deadline. The papers screamed, not metaphor, actual shrieks of torn cellulose, a chorus of dry, papery agony as they shriveled black against my boots. The folder curled inward, edges smoking with static, text vanishing letter by letter until only my signature remained. It crawled toward the crease, disappearing into the seam like ink sucked back into pen. The corridor trembled, stairboards groaning, rafters bending. I slammed palms against the ground, pushed up and staggered toward the heaving door. It opened reluctantly, yawning with the pitch of a wounded animal. The air beyond rushed fresher, forest cold, pine sharp. I stumbled through, clutching nothing but the compass still swinging wildly on my chest. Behind me, the door slammed, though there was no frame to hold it, no hinges to guide it. Just one last knocking on glass from beneath the soil. Polite, almost approving. My breath finally returned in a ragged flood, chest searing from the borrowed minutes expiring. The forest finally thinned, opening onto the ridgeline where night sky poured silver over the peaks. My compass lay flat against my chest, finally steady, finally pointing north like it had remembered its job. For the first time in hours, or years, or whatever time the corridor had eaten, I felt air without weight. But the trailhead wasn't there. No truck waiting, no gravel pullout, just another stretch of pines leaning together as if they'd never been cut apart. My boots sank into soil where asphalt should be. I turned, desperate, and the corridor stood polite behind me, only now wearing the shape of the forest I thought I knew. I raised the compass again. It spun once, twice, then froze, not on north, but on the page crinkling in my vest pocket. I pulled it free. Blank paper, edges damp. The crease still alive. My hands shook as the first words bled across the surface in my own handwriting. Unit 7 returned. Returned where? Returned how? The ink didn't bother to explain. The forest around me grew still again, the kind of stillness that comes just before dawn, or just before a knock. I swallowed hard, staring at the page as a second line appeared beneath the first. but not alone. I dropped the paper, but the words didn't fall with it. They stayed on the inside of my eyelids when I blinked. They stayed in the rasp of the wind threading branches. They stayed in my own breath when I whispered the mantra. Not real. Real. Not real. Not like this. The forest let me walk, but each step carried the echo of someone walking with me, half a pace behind. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because if I did, I knew I'd see the version of myself I'd left in there, pen still scratching, folder still filling. And if I looked too long, I might sit back down and keep writing. So I walked. And I'll keep walking. But if you hear my voice, if you hear it when I'm not around, don't answer.